This podcast is brought to you by B2B Better. Most B2B podcasts rack up downloads, but they never move the needle on pipeline. At B2B Better, we build own media systems that sales teams actually use to close deals. We've helped companies turn their podcasts into revenue engines, shortening sales cycles, improving outbound reply rates, and directly influencing millions in pipeline. So if you're tired of content that looks good on paper, but doesn't drive business results, visit b2b-better.com to see how we do it differently. Hello everyone, welcome to another episode of Pipe Dream in our 1 in 100 series. I'm very excited today to be joined by an old friend of mine who was originally a guest on the first iteration of this podcast when we called it B2B Better way back when. Sonia from Yapping as a Service. Welcome back. It is good to see you.
Yeah, it's good to see you too. I don't like being called an old friend, but fine.
There might be a better way of phrasing that. There might be yes. Well, look, I mean, just to put some context into the time it's been, like we were just talking before we started recording here. I think the last time we done the interview on B2B Better, we both didn't have, children.
Yeah.
and now you've got two and I've got one, and we've gone through a
Yeah.
couple of different jobs since then. And
Yeah.
we're very excited to have you on to talk about yapping as a service, which I love, both as a phrase and as an acronym. Why don't you tell us a little bit about YaaS? What does it mean? And why should people be thinking about it?
Yeah, I guess it kind of just came from the fact that I kept seeing founders on, social media kind of complain that they're either aren't getting, enough distribution. They're not really talking about things, this whole idea of like the pressure to have to build in public. And my response was like, well, yeah, you have to do marketing to, get your product out there, get people to know what your product is, what it does, how it does it. And one of the best ways to do that is you as a founder to be out there talking about it. But it just required this, additional time for them to go out there and talk about it. And a lot of them were like, well, I just want to focus on the product. I just want to build. And there was a time when that was acceptable because it's like your product was good enough, everybody would see it. But now there are so many products, especially in the age of AI, so many of the same types of products that people are like, well, why would I care about yours versus the others? So we started seeing this whole idea of founder-led comms, of them, going direct and, talking themselves. And if you could build up an audience, then that audience would then pay attention to your product. But a lot of founders found that difficult, right? They found it difficult to be out there talking about their product, talking about themselves. So that's kind of where I come in, where I help founders figure out like a couple like content pillars that relate back to why they're building the product, the insight for why they're the best team to be building the product, and start talking about those and essentially make you into a thought leader with your own words, and make it interesting enough that people actually want to pay attention, which I think is the hard part.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I love this because it really talks to kind of like the whole kind of sentiment and thesis that we have here at Pipe Dream, which is like your biggest differentiator. I used to say in service-based businesses that were commodities, but I think increasingly also in product-led businesses is and are your people and your point of view, right? And so if I'm looking at, whether it's an accountant, or whether it's I'm looking at, I don't know, a piece of productivity software, whether I'm looking at a service offering or whether I'm looking at a set of features, eventually it all kind of blends into one. And then I'm left asking myself, well, then I'm just going to be looking at price, and then it's a race to the
Yeah.
bottom, and who wants to be in that race? And so what you're saying is that you're building your business and have built your business around this idea of like differentiation through thought leadership, which I know we could spend a lot of time talking about.
Yeah, well, one thing I'll say is we're also starting to see a lot more founders come from the industry that, they're trying to build for, right? So we're seeing actual lawyers build legal AI. We're seeing actual like manufacturers make like manufacturing software that they know they need in that industry. So that's always going to be a better insight and a like better, a warmer intro, say, than like the folks that aren't lawyers that are trying to build, legal software. So I think that's like an insight that people want to know. Like, I want to know that I can trust that the person that is building this AI for me actually knows what they're doing and actually knows what they're talking about and isn't going to get me into hot water because it started hallucinating some legal cases that didn't exist, right?
Yeah.
So in the age of AI, so much of the trust factor goes back to people, and that's where like the human, centered messaging really makes a difference. So especially if you're building an AI, like bringing it back to why you know that your AI is going to do better than, ChatGPT or, even Claude, right? Claude is good, but it's not that good. So that's what you should be talking about.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely, right? It's like having trust that the person sat across the table from you has been there and done that, right? They're going to be able to help you identify the problems that they may experience and help you uncover the challenges, sorry, the opportunities, I should say, that maybe they haven't thought about. I want to get into specifics, right? And you've touched on some of this already, which is, around the question of why, right? Why thought leadership? Why put yourself out there? And particularly in some of these industries that you just referenced, right? Law and manufacturing, historically maybe perhaps been a hesitancy to put yourself out there, a discomfort in being a voice and a thought leader in your space. I'd love for you just to run me through, to the people who are listening to this, who are maybe considering to do thought leadership, why they should do that, why it's important over investing their marketing dollars in any other kind of marketing channel, be it events, be it AEO, GEO, SEO, why thought leadership?
The honest answer is that it's the least amount of time that a CEO can spend on marketing that I've tried out, right? I've done the event stuff. I've done the, gosh, like there's just so many marketing things, the AEO, SEO type stuff. But I've found that, doing this thought leadership thing of even spending 15 to 20 minutes with like the founder and CEO and talking about what's happening in the industry, what's changing, what you're building to address what's changing, is the best way to position your company as knowing what you're talking about, because it's coming directly from the source and directly from the person who knows best what's happening, right? I'll give you an example. Right now there's all this stuff happening with like age verification and like this idea that children need to be protected online, right? I'm working with a client that like works in that space, and a lot of what we talk about is that the way that the laws are getting communication or the proposed regulations are getting communicated are from people that don't know how they actually function when you put them to work, right? So there's just all this missing, work that's like that can be done by getting that explained to through the thought leadership. And then that's where we're seeing all like the rise of impressions and like, engagement that's happening on social media is by him being like, actually, this isn't how it works, when you put it into practice. And the reason why big tech companies are pushing for this is because it ends up benefiting them. And that is like what you're intending to do is not what's actually going to happen. And there's so many industries where this is the case, right? Where it's like things start moving in a certain direction, and like the people that know best aren't being vocal enough to let the rest of us who don't know anything about what's happening or think that something sounds good, right? It sounds good to protect the children. But like that's not how it would actually function if you were to put it in place. So that's where we need those thought leaders to come out and say like, no, like let me break down how this actually works. Where I come in is I take all like the, legal jargon and the regulation, like, terminology, and make it easier for regular people to understand and find it enticing, right? That's where it's like you do need that person to, and usually that's a marketer that can come and help you translate that into regular human speak that makes it interesting for everybody else to understand, and then makes it so that they care about what you're actually selling, and then bring it back to like the product.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, you touched on a really interesting point, which is around like these kind of subject matter experts, these practitioners, these operators being these kind of huge fountains of knowledge, right? That otherwise and historically has kind of gone untapped. I used to always say in my previous company I worked at before setting up the agency, we worked in broadcast tech, and we were plugged into every major rights owner, rights holder, broadcaster, league, team, federation globally, doing some amazing work. But we never, it's not that we didn't talk about it, like we had case studies, but it always rubbed me up the wrong way that, I was reading trade media who were trying to explain what's happening in the industry, and often doing so lacking knowledge, context, real world experience, and so giving a slightly distorted view of what's happening. Whereas here we are, like actually doing the do, like making the
Mhm.
things happen,
Yeah.
understanding the problems, the challenges, the opportunities, and not talking about it other than
Mhm.
in a way which felt entirely self-serving. Like, we're
Right.
doing a case study, we're doing a press release. And what you're talking about here is kind of, if I'm understanding correctly, like flipping that on its head. It's not, here's us talking a lot about what we know and what we can do, right? And like why we're the best. It's more about, these are the things that you should be aware of. These, this is how you should be looking at these problems. Um, and by extension, you should trust us because we're demonstrating we know what we're talking about. Am I understanding that right?
Yeah, basically, it's like, how do we put it into your everyday context of how it actually affects you, and then how we're actually improving your life with our product. And I will say that the biggest, thing that I found that founders kind of cringe against is like, oh, putting myself out there and being cringe, right? And so like a way to kind of think about that is that like it's not about the company, it's not about you, but it's about the industry as a whole, and like what's happening there that affects everybody else. And that's where they start to get a little bit more like interested in talking, because it's like all of a sudden they're like, I do actually have a lot to say about this. I've just never known how to get it out. And so that's where, the yapping as a service comes in, right? We, make that into newsletters. We, get them onto creating video content for it. The video part is like the harder part, right? Much like I'm sure you find with like the podcast is like, oh, I have to like be on video and like talk about this.
Hmm.
But that's where people are getting their information from. If you look at like social media, TikTok, reels, they've all kind of, become this huge thing because that's what people are defaulting to. And you got to go where the audience is, right? And it's okay to be cringe. That actually works to your benefit because it shows people that like, hey, you're being authentic and you're being you. Like I just saw a stat come out yesterday showing that Gen Z, like if they know that something is AI, like a picture is AI, it completely turns them against the product. Like they're like, no, thank you. I don't, if you don't trust me to see what it actually looks like, then I don't want like to even like think about your brand anymore. So that's something that like we should all be using to our advantage. Like be human, be authentic, like make mistakes. It's okay to have typos. It's okay to not say something perfectly the first time, because then people know that it's an actual human talking to them, and not, an AI. So, these are all things that we can all be thinking about to improve the marketing of our product or service.
Yeah, and I want to use that as a segue to kind of move into some of the practicalities that are required in order to kind of pull off the type of service that you're offering for your clients. And I think, maybe where we can start is around this idea of, as I understand it, and what you're saying to me before this call, you sit down with your clients every couple of weeks, 20, 30 minutes, you're asking them questions, allowing them to kind of share their perspective on the questions that you're asking them, and then going away and kind of packaging that up into the content that they can put out across their channels. And I don't know about you, but like I think that does seem to be resonating with the clients that we're working with here at B2B Better, if for no other reason than just the speed. Like the speed that it takes to vocalize thoughts, even if they are messy, is 3, 4, 5 times quicker than actually sitting down and typing them out. And particularly, I would imagine for the busy executives that you work for, that is the case. So, kind of talk me through what a typical like uh, engagement looks like for you and your clients that has them go from nothing to a finished output or outputs that they can then put out across their channels.
Yeah, so the main package that I promote is this, the Yapping as a service, where it's a biweekly newsletter, that, we'll sit down and have those conversations. So what I'll do is, we'll be on Riverside and have a conversation where I'm asking them questions about the research that I've done about what's happening in their industry at that time. Usually you can find something that has like crossed over into like the mainstream. So like let's talk about that. And we then pair it up with any product features or releases that you're currently working on or are about to launch, to pair it up with having like a fully formed like newsletter about like, hey, these are the thoughts from the CEO. Here's what's happening in the industry that make it relevant. Here are other things that people are talking about, to kind of make it more, fully fleshed out and not just like, here's a CEO giving his thoughts about like this thing, but, really having those like product updates. I'll say that a lot of companies aren't even putting out product updates anymore. They're just like, sometimes they'll put out a case study here and there. And then they forget that they still have to continue marketing to their current users, especially if you are, not retaining them as much as you would like. So using all that you're already building and making sure that your current audience and your, future audience knows about it, works, both ways to bring them back. So then I'll, basically write out the newsletter, get like their input of like, yes, this is what I said. And it's usually because I'm talking to you like as an interview, it's actually coming from your mouth, the way that you think, the way, I just kind of like position it, to make sense for everybody else. And then we'll put out the newsletter, and then we'll put out some video content as well on social media. But every client kind of wants something different. So there are like additional things that we can, put into that. Just, doing more, social media marketing where we're actually putting that onto the various channels, expanding the video content that you're putting out to actually make it, longer form. But what I'm actually finding is that a lot of the clients end up being like, well, I'm doing all this thought leadership. What can we do now? And then that's where the, PR angle kind of comes in, where it's like, now I can be pitching you to podcasts and to like newsletters, and I can start pitching you to the media as like a source, that can talk about these topics. And, journalists are always looking for new voices, especially if they really know the industry to like, walk them through like what this actually means. Um, and so it's like this, bigger package that comes from the thought leadership, right? So think about that, where it's like you're starting small, which is like me putting my thoughts out to the world, and all of a sudden your thoughts are making a difference to a wider audience because they're getting picked up by, people that are in that space, like podcasters, substackers, all that, and then even journalists in the, bigger media landscape.
Okay, so we've talked about why it is that investing in thought leadership, yapping as a service is a good idea. We've talked a little bit about the practicalities of what that looks like, how you go from 0 to 1. I wanna talk a little bit about measurement and defining success, because certainly the kind of clients that we speak with here at B2B Better, the question mark always comes back down to ROI. And so if we're going to be spending money on developing this type of content, if we're going to be paying you a 3, 4, 5, 6 grand retainer every month, how do we know it's working, right? What are the milestones and the markers that we're looking at to tell us that? I'm curious to get a sense from you as to, when you're put that question, what is your response? Like, how are you helping your clients evaluate the success of these kind of programs?
There's a variety of things. So first, obviously, are the analytics that come from social media. Like we can tell when something is hitting, better or worse. What I like to say is social media is the easiest way to test messaging for people, that you can then bring back to your, user base. So we'll test things out there, and then we'll then incorporate that into like the newsletter or like the video content that they're, talking about. What I've seen as well is, you do have to be good at actually promoting the content, right? So I've had, some clients where it's like, okay, we start, putting out the podcast, but then like, or we start putting out the video content and the newsletters, but then we don't actually like promote it on social media, right? It's just like we keep it as an internal email newsletter. It's like, okay, but you're missing out on all the people that could be learning about it that aren't reading your email, right? So as soon as we start putting that as like a LinkedIn newsletter, they've started to get, clients that they've been trying to pitch on being like, "Hey, I saw this piece that you put out on, LinkedIn," like, and they start referencing it. So it shows that they're reading it in a different medium, and then they're bringing it back into the conversation that they're having to, have sales calls. So that's been like one of the biggest ones where it's like, the CEO came to me and they're like, "Hey, a prospective client came back to me and said that they saw my newsletter on LinkedIn, referenced it back to me, and told me I had brought up some really good points. So that shows it's like you're reaching, your prospective clients in a different way that they wouldn't have seen before if you hadn't put out the newsletter, right? That's one. Another one is what I was talking about, getting you into like, podcast and um the media, right? Like you might not always want to be like, "Hey, I'm doing this podcast, listen to this." But you're more than, a lot of people are more than happy to say, "Hey, I was in this article, this journalist wrote about me." And that's another way for you to promote yourself and your company, but then to also add legitimacy to, the person that you're trying to convert, because now all of a sudden they're like, "Whoa, like journalists are writing about this company?" Like, even if it's a trade magazine, they're like, "Oh, okay, like this is legit," right? So it's like you're adding this like layer of like other people's trust, and their journalistic integrity or whatever into like the company. So that's also, a way to kind of, think back on that. And then a lot of the times too is like we'll use social media to interact with your community a lot more than they had been, right? Like sometimes you'll see like the founder account, sorry, you'll see the company account, puts out a pretty boring statement about like, "Hey, we just released these features," right? But then like the founder puts it out and it's like, "Hey, we've, built this feature and this is like what we were doing. This is how the team," they're able to add more color and flavor to posts that company accounts can't really do. And so we see a lot more interaction with like founder accounts than we do with company accounts because they can put that personality out there. So it's like really trying to like, talk to your community in a way that gets them to respond and actually engage, right? I mean, so many of us have seen like company accounts just kind of post something, get like a couple likes, and then be like, "Well, why doesn't actually anybody care?" And it's like, okay, well, maybe try having the founder talk about it, and shout out to all like their workers, and put it in the context of like how hard their team has worked to give this to like their community or their clients, and see if that gets you a different engagement rate. And I've seen the difference. Like I even suggest now, like, if you only have time to post to one account, the founder account or the company account, post to the founder account. Like, don't even bother with the company account anymore, unless it's like, you do have the time to kind of keep that going. But, there's less and less time for people to focus on different, channels. Focus on the ones that are actually going to give you a bigger return.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the you hit the nail on the head there around, founder versus brand accounts. And I mean, there's research that suggests that at any given time, the collective audience of your employee base will be 10 times larger than your brand account. It's like a sliding scale in the sense that the bigger your brand account gets, the more employees that you get, the bigger the following will there be.
On top of that, I'll also say I've started working with companies where their employees are so like, are seeing the differences in engagement rates to the founders that now they're like, "Well, maybe I should start posting about doing my sales job or doing my, engineering job." And it's like, "Yes, you should start posting. You should be proud to work at the company that you're working at and sharing all these learnings and, like, what you're going through." Um, and that ends up getting, other engagement because now you're tapping into those audiences who are generally in the same industry, right? And now it's like, whoa, I have to pay attention to this company because their employee likes working there so much that they're posting about it. And then you're getting, marketing from all angles. You're getting it from the founder, you're getting it from the sales team, you're getting it from the marketing team. And so that's just amplifying your brand even more. So definitely, use that to your advantage. I know that some companies are like, should we have employees posting on our behalf? And it's like, come on, man. Like, you want people to be people, and their job is part of that, is part of who they are as people. So like get them to do that. Don't force anybody. Don't go sending out like, "Hey, it'd be great if you guys could, talk about this, or like, support this or whatever." But, have it be organic because that's always going to come out more authentic. So it becomes a company venture that everybody gets interested in, which has been fun to work with.
For sure, and I think it does always start from the top, right? You
Yeah.
know, like, and as you approach it, if the founder is seen to be taking this seriously
Mhm.
and can articulate within a business the reason why we're doing this, I'm doing this, is because, you know, there is commercial value in us doing this.
Yeah.
It becomes far easier to persuade the rest of the company to jump on board as well. Now, not everyone's going to do it, and that's what you're saying, right? Like, some people just aren't that interested, and that's
Yeah.
absolutely fine. You can't force them to do it, but I do think there are a lot of people out there who are working for organizations who probably would be incredibly effective assets on social media if they felt comfortable, they felt like they had the permission, and they felt like they had the tools they needed to go out there and actually do it, right? And I think, as you say, that kind of starts from the top.
Yeah, the other thing I'll say is, I mostly work with founders because I work with, early stage startups about Series A. So there aren't that many employees or there aren't that many roles that the CEO either isn't doing or doesn't know enough about. But for larger companies, medium sized to large, it would be more effective to also get like the leaders of, different departments to talk about what they do and how it affects, everybody else, right? Like, there's stuff that could be happening like in the marketing role or like as like sales and design. Like one of the ones that we did for a company was actually having sales and design talk to each other about like what their customers think about. So you had like, the designer talking about from like the designer side of things, and then the salesperson talking from the sales side of things, and them having the conversation as like a customer representative almost. And that ended up, being one of our best pieces of content, because now all of a sudden, like the designers, the salespeople that they were, pitching to, realize that it's not just, the CEO kind of talking about this. It's like, no, it's like there's actual people in there that understand where you're coming from, that can speak to those things in the language that you understand far better than like, the CEO can. So, inviting the other people to talk about like what they do and how it affects everybody else is also, super, super great content that like you can use. And if you could get your customers on, oh, that's like the best, right? Because it's like
Rocket
you can
fuel.
have those like
Yeah.
case studies that are like video content that are more engaging because you're being people, rather than putting out, a blog post about the case study.
Yeah, awesome. Well, this has been an amazing conversation about yapping as a service, which I love. Again, as a name and as an acronym. For people who are listening to this and who want to learn more about you and your work and how you can help them, where should they go?
I'm across all social media at Sonia Baschez. That's Baschez. Or you can look up Ben's Growth as well. And then I also have a podcast that talks about marketing as like why viral moments happen and why they kind of get into pop culture. To kind of show you why marketing transcends everything, and why you should care. And that's the meme team.
Great. Well, we'll drop the link to that podcast in the show notes of this episode. It has been such a pleasure having you back on to the podcast, and let's not leave it as long next time to bring
Yeah.
you on for round three. By which
Yeah,
point we will
definitely.
be even older friends than we are
I know,
today.
right? Exactly.
Awesome.
But
Well, thank you so
yeah,
much.
thanks so much for having me on.